hardly find anyone nowadays who hasn't heard of the World Wars. The events that lead up to these dark times had already been in motion from the time the Treaty of Versailles was signed. We will start with the most notable country from this time, who was part of the Axis powers, Germany, who was not in a good place following World War I. The Treaty of Versailles had made them pay massive war debt, and they were forced to follow a policy of disarmament. The National Socialist German Workers' Party, commonly known as the Nazi Party, rose to power. From the beginning, their core values had been characterized by German nationalism and, most notably, anti-Semitism. Shortly after it was founded, Adolf Hitler was made the leader. His rise to power was swift, and his influence on the country became dangerously prevalent. By 1933, he had become Chancellor of Germany and led the country into a dictatorship. Through this, he managed to convince almost an entire country that Jews and other undesirables needed to be exterminated to make room for the master Aryan race. Benito Mussolini was the leader of Italy in the war. Although he was originally socialist, he started a fascist movement in the year of 1919 and soon after became prime minister. Fascism is founded on a belief that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. In other words, some individual liberties should be taken away for the good of the nation as a whole. Initially, Mussolini did not approve of Hitler's actions, but eventually sided with him. The next power we will consider is Japan. Hideki Tojo was the military leader, and Hirohito was the emperor. Ally powers. France was the first Allied power, but soon after the war was forced into German occupation. Great Britain was the second Allied power, led by Winston Churchill, a well-liked chancellor. The United States, led by Franklin D. Roosevelt, coming in 2 years after the war started. And finally, Russia, who switched sides during the war and was led by Joseph Stalin. They agreed to work with Hitler at first, but after he attacked them, all bets were off. Leading up to the war. Tensions rose when Germany started to break the rules laid out in the Treaty of Versailles, such as rearming themselves. Then, Germany invaded Czechoslovakia. Under the agreements made years prior, Germany should have been punished for this. However, Britain, France, and Germany met at the Munich Peace Conference of 1938, and they decided to appease Germany and let them keep Czechoslovakia, and in return, they wouldn't go to war. Then, that same year, Germany annexed Austria. You would think Germany's imperialistic hunger would be satiated. Not even close. The following year, Germany and Russia signed a non-aggression pact, but the Nazi Party never had a good track record of keeping promises. On September 1st, 1939, Germany attacks Poland, and France and Britain declare war. The war begins.
September 1st, 1939, marks the beginning of World War II. Germany had invaded Poland. Britain and France soon responded on September 3rd, declaring war on Germany, but despite their efforts, Poland was taken over within a month of the first invasion by a mixture of German and Soviet Union forces. To the French, the war seemed further away than it actually was. A little more than half of a year later, Germany invaded France and very quickly took over due to their blitzkrieg strategy. Blitzkrieg translates to lightning war from German, which is exactly what it sounds like. Their elite use of motorized vehicles, tanks, and aircrafts was unmatched. They quickly strike and immobilize the enemy, giving them little to no time to communicate with their surrounding allies. Germany was actually one of the only nations to effectively combine its forces in radio communications, ultimately making an unbelievably devastating strategy. The government had surrendered and left Paris on June 10th, and the Germans began flooding in on the 14th. This act sent many people spiraling into despair and tragedy, with millions evacuating and leaving their homes behind, along with the majority of France's military ending up being prisoners of war. December 7th, 1941, a day that will live in infamy. An attack without warning, taking out 188 U.S. aircrafts and killing 2,403 Americans. The attack on Pearl Harbor just led to more death and destruction. The Battle of Britain. This battle was a clash in the skies between Britain and Germany. The Battle of Britain acted as a significant turning point in the Second World War. Because of Britain's decisive victory, this saved the ground from invasion and quite possibly an entire takeover. The invasion of Normandy, D-Day, the largest full-blown attack by water located on the northern coast of France. June 6, 1944 is undoubtedly the biggest turning point of the war. After this victory, it left a beachhead for the Allies in France and propelled us closer to victory. But there are still terrible things happening in Germany.
The Holocaust officially starts off with death camps in 1940. Before the Holocaust, Germany killed over 500,000 Jews. Then in the fall of 1941, all Jews had to start wearing a yellow Star of David to identify themselves. Also in 1941, Germany had their first massive transport of Jews from the ghettos to the camps where they most likely went to: Chmelo, Zabrebra, Treblinka, and Mundane, and the most well-known, Auschwitz. Then in the March of 1942 was the first massive gassing at a camp. It's estimated that 12,000 Jews were killed daily. Then as the Nazi Party lost control of the government, the camps were still able to go strong. Towards the end of the war, Nazis had to start evacuating the camps by doing death marches, which is where they would march away from the front lines and go days of walking without stopping. These marches continued until Germany surrendered in 1945. It's estimated that about 375,000 people died from these marches. At the end of the war, about 6 million Jews were killed and about 9 million non-Jews. Non-Jews including Romanian gypsies, courageous resistors, priests and pastors who died for their beliefs, homosexuals, and the disabled. So in total, the death count came to about 15 million from the Holocaust. The war ended on September 2, 1945, where a peace treaty was signed on the USS Missouri for the overall war. In Europe, though, the war ended on May 8, 1945, even though Germany surrendered on April 29th after their leader Adolf Hitler's death. Then the unconditional surrender was signed on May 7, 1945, and the war was declared over by Winston Churchill May 8, 1945.